welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Tim Smith. He's been on multiple times. This is like, well, we've talked about JFK, RFK. The only thing we haven't talked about is aliens and Bigfoot.
Yeah, and comic books.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We keep saying we'll get to it, and we always end up falling back into JFK. But I wanted to have you back on because anybody listening, I've dived into the HSCA briefly, very light touch, and it wasn't until I spoke with Tim Smith, and then he was able to hook up kind of audio recordings and interviews and things that I've been listening to over and over again and being able to make these fine clips that you see on the channel. So Tim, thank you for that. But I wanted to get you to introduce yourself to everyone out there listening first, and then we can kind of get into some of the things we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. My name is Tim Smith, as Robbie said, and I wrote a book called Hidden in Plain Sight, which was an analysis of the 52 people who gave public testimony before the House Select Committee on Assassination. There were many people who they talked to, obviously, but there were only 52 who testified in public, which was a way, according to G. Robert Blakey, who was the chief counsel, and he told me in an interview that this was their way to present the evidence to the American public. So that's why those 52 people testified the way they did.
Do they have the answers that we've all kind of been asking? I guess is the question. The HSCA kind of gets overlooked because there's many problems with the HSCA, and it seemed like it had maybe a fixed conclusion, or much like the Assassination Records Review Board, it had a wait date, means that we're going to wait you out until this is over with.
Right. The HSCA made some gains, no question about that. I think the acoustics evidence alone, if they did nothing else, I'm good with that, because I think that cemented some issues that up until that point, well, they were just totally unknown. And if they were known for saying anything, and while that has come under scrutiny, at the end of the day, I think at the end of the day, it's really all about science, and to a certain degree. A lot of the issues are just scientific issues, and I think the acoustics evidence, certainly the HSCA indicated there were 5 shots, no question about that. And of course, once you go down that road, then of course the weight is, where did those shots take place? And there's all kind of issues that come out of that. They said 4 came from behind and 1 came from the front, the grassy knoll. That was shot number 4 that did that. So in that sense, yeah, sometimes you're reading the HSCA testimony, at least the 52 witnesses who gave public testimony, and you go, "Oh my God, the fix is in." They're not even going down roads that they could be or should be. Some people, I think, were honest, and I think some people who cross-examined the witnesses did a good job and were aggressive without being annoying or confrontational in an overt manner. But yeah, there were times you felt like, why they interviewed Jack White? I mean, come on. And that's not being, uncharitable. It's just like, it didn't do anything. And there were people, and I asked Blakey about that when I interviewed him. He used to teach law down at Notre Dame, and I'm about a half hour, 40-minute drive from Notre Dame. So it was easy for me to go down there and talk with him. And he said there were certain people that they should have interviewed, and he regrets they didn't, like Bill and Gail Newman. And he also regrets that they interviewed people like Jack White, because it did absolutely nothing. It's like they were just setting Jack White up. Let's make fun of this guy. And that's just like, what's the point of that? Come on, we're better than that. So yeah, the HSCA did make some good gains, Robbie, no question about that. And could they have done better? Well, yeah, of course they could have, but they didn't.
Do you think that everyone was on the committee was open to looking for anything of conspiracy? Because I think the more I listened to Richardson Pryor, who was the chair of that subcommittee that was investigating the JFK assassination, there's also another committee investigating the Martin Luther King one. But it seemed like Richardson Pryor was not throwing conspiracy out of the works yet. And I think he mentions it when the acoustics gets brought up, is that if this new acoustic evidence does prove that there's a second shooter, then we're going to have to relook at this whole thing. Like, he was very open to discussing and getting down to facts. A lot of things I think that the HSCA was able to prove is questions we've always asked. Why were the Secret Service not reprimanded for drinking the night before, or, not staying out late? Why was certain things of evidence or certain tests done, but then there was no conclusion on these tests? I think it's the same thing Robert Edgar asked of, I'm going to blank on the dude's name who did it. It's Montes is his name.
Monty Lutz.
Yes, Monty Lutz, when they're talking about the rifle and the pistol and all that. And they said that, how were you able to prove that the pistol was the one that could be matched to the Tippit shooting? And they really couldn't prove it because the ammunition was also different, but also the gun had been fired so many times by the FBI that it was basically considered unusable. So these are things that are huge in the case of like if you're trying to use evidence of like we got Oswald's rifle and we got his pistol. Well, have you guys fired the pistol and have you fired the rifle and is it able to pull off those things? I don't think he was able to pull off the Lutz tried his hardest to make it sound like he could reload it fast enough to match the seconds. But then he was even mentioning with a scope or without a scope. Did you test that? You know, like they're trying to understand like you have to aim. You can't just sit there and show me you can reload really fast because you have to also be get in your line of sight and then fire at the president that's moving farther and farther away.
Right, and there's a lot of problems with that. Oswald was not the greatest shot. His scores were not that great. And we have to keep in mind there's only three levels of scores. So when someone says Oswald had the second highest, that also means he had the second lowest. So I'm sorry if I'm not impressed. But his one score, I think, was like 191, which is just like 1 point above getting kicked out of the Marines for being a terrible shot. In fact, when Lieutenant Colonel Folsom testified before the Warren Commission, he said that Oswald was a rather poor shot because this is someone shooting at a range where you have enormous amounts of time to practice before you're actually tested. And there was no wind apparently that day, so it was great conditions. And he only scored a 191. But then we're led to believe that in a highly pressured situation, and I think we forget that it's not just he's shooting at the president of the United States. You can't tell me that that would not rattle your nerves a little bit. I don't care who you are. So when I hear people like Joe Rogan talk on his show, though, that really wasn't a difficult shot, to which I would say to Joe Rogan, you're right. If you're Joe Rogan and you have a modern day rifle, I totally agree with you. But we're not talking about Joe Rogan with a modern day rifle. We're talking about Lee Harvey Oswald, who Lieutenant Folsom said he was a rather poor shot using a weapon that was invented in 1841 and they quit making it in 1891. I mean, are you kidding me? And when the FBI tested the rifle, it shot high and to the right. Kennedy's limousine is moving from right to left, and this rifle shoots high and to the right from like 30 yards away. And when would Oswald have sighted the rifle in? I mean, there's just so many problems with this theory, not to mention the acoustics that we mentioned a little earlier. And the one shot that the acoustics did an enormous deep dive with, which they didn't with every angle and every shot and every possibility, but they did when it came to the grassy knoll shot. That was the deepest dive they took acoustically. And they said, absolutely, like a 95% shot probability that someone definitely shot from the grassy knoll. But you'll hear people say, well, I've listened to those tapes and I didn't hear anything. Well, of course you didn't hear anything. You wouldn't be able to hear anything any more than if I'm talking on the phone. You're not going to hear people talking in the background because it's voice graded. And the same thing for that. So there's all kind of problems that people try to assume into the controversy when they're really not problems at all.
Did you find it hard to understand why so many people in one specific location could hear such a myriad of things? Nellie Connally, for instance, and John Connally immediately said that the shots came from behind them to their right. I think Malcolm Kilduff even states that, but then Malcolm Kilduff also states, I don't know what the hell anybody's talking about seeing a rifle barrel sticking out of a window. I never saw anything like that. I didn't see anybody up on the sixth floor. I saw some people on some floors below. And then you get into, I just heard Cyril Weck talked about this in like an old Oswald on trial type thing. And he mentioned that he thought the shots came from the second floor or something at a more of a lower angle.
Right.
If he was going to talk about the way that the bullet trajectories would match just certain wounds through Connally and JFK, if you were going to subscribe to the magic bullet.
I think that part of that problem, Robbie, and in my book, in the very first chapter, I try to argue that there was a shot at 313 and then there was another one at 327. If that's true, that's only 7/10 of a second. I can't snap my fingers that quick. So if someone says I heard three shots, it is highly probable that if shot 4 and 5 are on top of each other, as I argue in my book, then you wouldn't have heard two distinct shots because it would have happened too quickly. And we have to remember, people are not there that day to listen to shots. They're there to see the president and watch a parade. So they're not there to count shots. So could there have been more shots than people heard? Absolutely. And keep in mind, especially if you're in the car, by the time you get to the final shot, those people are pretty much incapacitated and not thinking about anything. They're traumatized, for goodness sakes. So the shot that hit Kennedy, I think, which is the fourth shot from the grassy knoll, and his head explodes, I think there's one right after that. And the reason I argue that way is because if you look at the photographs, at 327, and then you look at the photograph at 335, there is a massive, massive difference in the size of the head wound on Kennedy. So my question is real simple. What happened? What happened to enlarge that wound in like a half a second? There has to be an explanation for it. And the acoustics indicate that there was a shot at 327, as there was at 313. And to me, it explains it. The problem is the HSCA ran out of money. And when they had people ready to testify of the possibility of a shot at 327, they ran out of money. And the last thing they did was interview James Barger in December of 78, and he was the last person to testify. And he had testified earlier, so that was his second round. And then they closed shop, and they never met again.
When you listen to the HSCA, I guess what's the most fascinating for you? It doesn't have to be a specific person, but just a certain occurrence. I will say that I think I'm fascinated with Jeremiah O'Leary being a commentator throughout the whole HSCA as they conducted, and his opinions on things that weren't like official narrative. I mean, they did stick with the narrative, but he was very kind of balanced in the way he spoke, very careful with choosing his words, even questioning certain people like Richardson Pryor, who's the head of the subcommittee. Don't you think that this evidence or acoustic evidence is too new and maybe it's not something it's not seems like a Texas thing? Like, what the hell does a Texas thing have to do with
What does that
acoustical
even mean?
analysis? And again, the acoustic evidence has became so controversial. I think it was because it didn't get enough credence to maybe some time it had, and I guess there's different opinions on it. But there was him being there, then finding out that when Hoover gave testimony to the Warren Commission, that testimony was never going to be released. LBJ just said, you have to go give this testimony. We need you to, because I know everything's going to go back to your report. Well, Hoover ended up leaking his own testimony and used Jeremiah O'Leary to do it. So Jeremiah O'Leary is one of those people that were an inside person with the FBI when it came to control of the press. So now you have this guy and one of the major agencies that a lot of people suspect had some type of involvement in either a cover up or behind the assassination, is now narrating and commentating and bringing up opinions that are challenging people like David Lifton and others, where it's like, where do you get your credentials, O'Leary?
I know. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if you're aware, but Hoover brought in his own camera crew and filmed his testimony before the Warren Commission. Now, none of us have ever seen it and never will, I can assure you. And then they went over his testimony and made all kinds of changes and alterations in his testimony, and then submitted it to the Warren Commission. So we're not getting his pure testimony, and nor will we ever, because we'll never see the original, nor will we see the original document either that I'm aware of. So yeah, that whole thing was set up and plotted for consumption, to be sure. But yeah, the Jeremiah O'Leary thing is interesting, and the NPR video recordings, which I think they recorded like 30 out of the 90 hours. That's it. And those were only during the first few days, and then no more video after that. The only thing you have is the final 60 hours or whatever. You have the audio of that. But yeah, he was there, and they had Lifton there, and they brought in some usual suspects, and it was kind of interesting. There was other people I wish they would have brought in, but they didn't. And but it is interesting to listen to, because that is forgotten stuff. I can assure you, never hear anybody talking about the commentary by the people working for NPR at the time.
Which again, I think at this point where we're at, I think to get people interested into the case, if you're not already interested into it, is just by raising red flags. I am now attributing a lot of this to what Doug Horne did in the second JFK hearing, where he said, how could you have an autopsy change 4 times if it's a lone nut in a matter of 2 weeks? Like, it doesn't happen. There's not that many bungling of a case. I mean, as much as you want to say, but some of the most suspicious things, like the brain being missing, is the only evidence to really be able to look at if there was a potential 2 shooters. You'd be able to section it off. I think Cyril Wecht went through that all the way till he died.
Yep. Yeah, he did.
He also made a statement, and I wasn't too happy with Bugliosi on it, because he was saying, so you're saying that the reaction of the head going back is no indicator with the evidence that it's a shot from the front. And
Right.
Wecht said, well, if you listen to me, I said no available evidence
Right.
is an
Good point.
indicator of a shot from the front. If you control the evidence and you're holding all the investigative stuff and all the documents that take to be released, I mean, yeah, we don't have the evidence yet to show that there was a shot from the front, but they did look into conspiracy. The HSCA did. They did analyze the knoll. And I think they proved that there was a 99%
Sure.
chance that a conclusion that the shot came from the grassy knoll for shot.
And the first thing out of the opponents of what we're saying mouth is, well, the Academy for what was it? The National Academy of Sciences looked at the acoustic evidence and they debunked it. Well, first of all, the problem with that is the National Academy of Sciences did not have one acoustical expert on the entire panel. So I don't have much interest in what they have to say, to be honest with you. James Barger is probably, certainly was, and I think he's still alive, unless he died. I didn't hear about it. He was alive a few years ago, is the chief acoustical expert in the world. So I'm sorry if I'm going to take what he says. He doesn't seem to have an axe to grind. He's no big Kennedy assassination buff, that's for sure. And he said, absolutely, the evidence is overwhelming. And he agrees with Weiss and Ashkenazi, who came in and said 95% probability. The evidence is there. And I think, Don Thomas, before his passing, God rest his soul, did a marvelous job of articulating the acoustic evidence. You had a couple really good programs with him, Robbie.
Oh my God, the funniest thing I've ever heard him say was when I was talking about, like, at the ending, I was like, well, so what do you think? Like, what happens if all this at the end of it, we find out that's just Woody Harrelson's dad that took the shot from the grass? He goes, if that all came out at the ending, I don't know what I did. I'd probably slit my wrists. And I just started busting out laughing.
That's hysterical.
Because he's always so professional. He was always so professional. He was a very good guy to talk to. I was very fortunate to be able to speak with him the number of times I was able to speak with him. I think it was 3 times.
Was it 3 times?
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 or 2.
I know I watched 2 programs on Out of the Blank with him, but if there's a third, I definitely want to watch it.
I also have 500 something hours of unpublished recording in my little hard drive over here.
Do you really?
It was for a film I was making about the JFK assassination. Yeah, so I think Vince Palomara, every single person that's been on the show individually, has at least 2 to 3 hours worth of tape on that. That was right before I met you, Tim, and I stopped doing it because you know the basics, you see the movies, you hear the theories, you get your ideas, and I'm kind of at this point now, which I'm trying to do and learning as much as I possibly can, is coming at it with a balanced perspective. And I think through examining all the clips that I've been making so far is really just about, now you can Google things, people. Like, you can Google smoke on the knoll, type in Out of the Blank afterwards if you want, hit videos, it's going to pop up a video about the smoke on the knoll, whether it's other researchers I have independently talking about it or whether it's the people in the HSCA talking about it. That's the only thing we can do now that we're in the digital age. We should probably be focusing more on that. But I want to ask you a question here. Who do you think on the HSCA subcommittee was important to the questioning? Everyone seemed to have their own little bits and pieces. I think Floyd Fithian was very good with Marina Oswald when it came to questioning her if she wrote on the back of the photographs or not. And she's like, I don't remember. He's like, well, you got to remember, because I'm telling you, what's your education level? She goes, I was a nurse and I did this and did this. He goes, all right, so not even a child would write in Russian like this with the O over the T, and you wouldn't.
Right.
And he knew some shit.
He did.
Other people were like, kind of like, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. But then you get people like Sawyer, who brings in kind of the comedic aspect of things, and asking Marina, he goes, you didn't think to check the blanket in the garage for the rifle. It just seems like the first thing you should have done was to check the blanket to see if the rifle was there or not. And then, like, it's that simple and that kind of sophisticated questioning that we get through different members of the HSCA. So I wanted to get your opinion on who you think was the best and maybe the worst.
I think I would agree with you. I think those two, while they are different, they did in their own way ask some pretty good questions. I thought I was disappointed when, I think it was Gary Cornwall I think he was the one who was listening or interviewing and questioning Dr. Humes. And there was a point where he says, Dr. Humes, the forensic pathology panel has indicated that you made a mistake, that you have the wound in the back of Kennedy's head 4 inches lower than it was. And Humes responds by saying, I would have trouble with that. And Cornwell really doesn't follow it up. It's like, boy, here's an opportunity. All you got to do is say, what do you mean you have trouble with that? Like, why are you letting him off the hook, for goodness sakes? And I think he let him off the hook. Now, you can question him without being a jerk. And Cornwall, I think it was probably the most missed opportunity in the entire HSCA, because for goodness sakes, Humes, you had the body, you were with that body for 8 hours, you helped Tom Robinson, the mortician, put the head back together. If anyone knew where something was on that skull, it should have been you. How on earth do you miss a wound by 4 inches or approximately 10 centimeters? I mean, that would be like saying, okay, the football's on the 10-yard line when it really is on the other 10-yard line. That is a massive, gross mistake when the only thing you have to do is use a metric ruler to measure. How do you miss it that much? That would have been something that Cornwell should have really pressed Humes on, and he doesn't do it. And now behind the scenes, you can read their testimony. They interview the doctors behind the scenes, and they don't let Humes off the hook. But for public testimony, he kind of lets Humes off the hook a little bit. And I wish he wouldn't have, because I don't know if he was scared to be disrespectful. And that's a possibility, okay. But you don't have to be mean when interviewing someone to ask them tough questions, and he didn't do it. But otherwise, I think a lot of the people did ask really good questions, to be honest with you. There's always a part of me, the arrogant part of me, that says, if I'd have just been there, I could have given them a list of questions to ask these people. But, who knows at the end of the day.
I think there was a lot of moments in there that, at least I don't have on video, but you hear an audio or the tape cuts where I wonder many times when James Hosty gets brought up and certain things that were going on with the FBI, the tape cuts, and then it's a whole completely different conversation that's going on. I noticed that people like Stokes and people like Floyd Fithian were very kind of focused and targeted more towards the Hosty aspect of things. Samuel Devine asked some very good questions, but he was also very apologetic towards James Rowley in his testimony when it came to the Secret Service. He was like, what would we need to give you to do better at your job the next time around? Was this a thing of the not enough funding? And then James Rowley just tossed every excuse in the book. Oh, the car was armored. Well, there was no top. Oh, well, it was armored, which was weighing it down, which is why it might have took so long for the car to accelerate out of Dealey Plaza. And it's like he's trying everything to make sure it doesn't reflect that. And that's everybody's going to protect their ass in this situation. But one person for me on the HSCA witnesses, and I'm going to ask you the same thing.
Sure.
Who was someone that changed for you, like your opinion on them? And then who was someone that you felt less opinion for? I know you're probably going to say Jack White for one of those.
Yeah, it would be. Poor Jack White.
I would say Katzenbach, for me, changed my opinion on his involvement in the conspiracy. He gave one of the most heartfelt things I've ever heard about RFK, and he was RFK's secretary.
I agree.
And then he also was very critical about Hoover, saying that Hoover didn't like to be second to the president, and having Bobby in the way was an issue because he felt like he couldn't connect with the president how Hoover wanted to connect. Which again, this is the guy we all blame for saying it was Oswald on air and it was nobody else. It was like, was he just reiterating a report? You got to understand that he's in a critical situation.
I agree. I think much more has been made of the Katzenbach memo than probably should. I think when I read that, I'm reading he's just not even trying to cover his own butt as much as he's just trying to calm a storm. And I think that you can read way too much into that. And I would agree. I have a little bit of sympathy for Katzenbach as well. I think the person who comes across to me, because he's so darn consistent, because he also testified. I mean, 9 people who testified for the HSCA also testified for the Warren Commission. And of course, first and foremost out of the block is John Connally and his wife. This guy is almost script for script. These testimonies are identical. And he was that way to the end of his life. He never deviated one iota. And sadly, both the Warren Commission and the HSCA chose not to believe John Connally at the end of the day. And yet his testimony, I think, is very important, understanding the shot sequence, what happened. He says, he says the shot hit Kennedy did not hit me. His wife says, I know that's true because I looked around, JFK had been hit and my husband had not been hit yet. Well, it would only have been taken, 10,000th of a second for that bullet to go through Kennedy and into Connally. So she would have known if her husband would have been hit. So obviously that's a separate bullet. It destroys the single bullet theory, even though John Connally to his dying day tended to agree with the single bullet theory and that Oswald did it alone. But that's beside the point. The one thing is overlooked. John Connally said, I was turning to my right to get a glimpse of the president and I couldn't see him. Well, if that's true, that means Kennedy is enough inboard that when he turned to his right, he couldn't see him. And he says, I was in the process of turning to my left to look back at the president. And that's when he's, his famous, it was like a double up fist had punched me in my back. And that's obviously when he was hit. But if that's true, then that destroys the single bullet theory for another reason, because they don't line up. If Kennedy is far to his left, further to his left than we think, and Connally is more to the right, then how does that bullet go into Kennedy and then into Connally? It doesn't make any sense. And I think one of the most, and I didn't emphasize this enough in my book, though I did put it in there, is Connally's back wound. That back wound, you'll hear people say, well, it was oblong. So that means the bullet may have been yawning and moving or whatever, or hit a branch or whatever you want to argue. But that's not what his doctor said who tended to that wound. He said, when I tended to that wound, the wound was not oblong. It was circular. It was a straight in shot. And I'm the one who made it oblong when I cleaned it up. So I'm thinking, well, that ends that little controversy. He's the one, he admits, he said, I'm the one who did that. That's not because of a bullet ricocheting or doing all that other nonsense. And I think, so when you listen to Connally, it's not just listening to Connally. You have to listen to Connally's doctors as well. And when you put them together, it does not support the lone nut theory at all. And I think that's important. I think Connally was just an honest man testifying to what he honestly remembered. I really do. I don't think there's any. And when you see him, late in the sequence of shots, something hits Connally with enough force, it just knocks him over like a rag doll, and he's flat on his stomach in the in the bottom of the limousine. And that's where, to me, that makes sense, because Kennedy is hit at 327, and the bullet that goes through Kennedy's head at 327, which you don't see an explosion, by the way. The reason you don't is because the cranial cavity has already erupted at 313. So it can erupt twice. So the bullet that goes through Kennedy's head at 327, which enlarges the wound at the side of Kennedy's head, is like doubles or triples. I believe that is the wound that went into Connally's wrist. I don't think that wound that went into Connally's wrist is the bullet that went through Connally's chest and then into his wrist. I think the one that's Connally's wrist first goes through Kennedy's head at 327. It's the only thing that makes any sense to me. And so the famous tag bullet, first of all, I don't think you need a separate bullet. First of all, what are the odds, Robbie, that whoever is shooting that day is just nailing shot after shot? Kennedy and Connally, they're not missing anything. But then out of the blue, they not only miss the limousine, they don't even hit the road. They're a complete road. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Whoever was shooting that day, these guys were professional assassins. Those guys don't miss. They're not going to miss the entire road and go over and hit the next road over. That never made any sense to me. So I think what happens is the tag bullet is not necessarily an entire bullet, as much as something that ricochets out of the car at some point, and a fragment goes over, hits the curb, and shoots up and scrapes Tag in his cheek. I think that's a much better explanation than an entire bullet missing everything. I mean, goodness sakes, if you put me or you in that window that day, we're not going to miss the entire road. I don't care how bad of a shot we are. That's just ridiculous.
Were you surprised at the number of people that voiced their opinion or skepticism, even on the HSCA and also other separate interviews as well, too, whether it's oral histories and things of that sort, on certain aspects of the Warren Commission investigation? I mean, if you really honestly examine the Warren Commission investigation, you hear all the time that 3 of the 7 commission members or whoever denied certain aspects of the report. And I was like, no, it's every single member had a certain area in the report, much like the HSCA included in theirs, is the dissent of certain individuals. I think Robert Edgar for the HSCA had problems with the rifle issues and just the evidence and the testing on that. I believe Ford had issues with Marina Oswald's testimony and then some of the evidence that was used against Oswald. And then Sawyer had problems with the Secret Service. And again, Stokes had problems with the Secret Service. Blakey, they took a recess when they were asking James Rowley questions, and they came back. They said, Blakey has took us aside that we're going to discuss this at a later point because we don't have time in the rest of this investigation to be focused on certain reaction times and stuff like that with the Secret Service. And I was like, why would you do that? They don't get back to it. They never did.
They never get back to it. Of course they didn't. And then there was never any follow-up to the HSCA. And there was supposed to be a follow-up to the HSCA. The Department of Justice was supposed to take what the HSCA said and run with it. And of course they never did. The one guy who I would have loved to have talked to, and I think he was alive back when I interviewed Blakey, and I don't know why I didn't pursue it, just a youthful blunder, I guess, is Stokes. I would have loved to talk to Louis Stokes off the record, just me and him, having a hamburger at some restaurant. I think he would have been very interesting to talk to behind the scenes. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misjudging him, but I think he was an honest fella. And I think that he would have said things I would have went, oh, really? You believe that? I think I'd have been a little surprised, but not too much. Hard to say. Sometimes because he was all in on releasing the files and everything. So I don't know. Hard to say.
I like that take about talking to Stokes, but I would probably try and speak to Ford Sr.
Yeah,
He was not very. He was honestly the most prevalent in the umbrella thing.
sure.
Because he was very like, you kept that umbrella for 15 years.
Yeah.
You don't have another umbrella that could look like this umbrella. You went to your closet and you said, "This is the umbrella I used that day in Dealey Plaza."
How would you know that anyway? I mean, this guy, what's his name? Witt said, I had umbrellas everywhere. I had them in the car, I had them in the
I love
driveway.
it. Ford's like, you, so you like umbrellas, and it's just like they're joking with it, but they make a really good point. If they don't do this and they don't give this the time, then it's only going to leave room for more conspiracies to open with. Again, Earl Rose agreed with the official version, maybe separated on some certain points, but again, that's everybody. But he stated that if you let this body leave Dallas and it doesn't happen here, you are going to create room for speculation and rumors and all these things to grow. And he was correct. We have a whole myriad of theories. Again, if you're an LBJ person, if you're a CIA person, if you're a Oswald did it person, if you're whatever, that's fine. This is not what the conversation's about. The conversation that we're dealing with right now is looking at things that were raised and answered and questions that we seem to be rehashing 40 something years later, 50 something years later, and 60 something years later. These are things that were already asked and were already discovered. We can get to the evidence on Oswald. We can get into all these things. I'm actually going to try and walk us back a little bit because we have discussed a lot, and I kind of want to pause after I play these and go back to discussing another area. We're talking about the shot that missed, okay? The one that completely missed the whole car, and everyone's kind of asking the questions of how did this happen. Now, Malcolm Kilduff, I have a audio interview with him where that was the main thing for him, was talking about the magic bullet theory. He just could not buy it. He doesn't understand it. Then a phone call with Richard Russell where he literally talks about how the hell did he get 2 shots in the car and then miss the whole damn street.
I agree totally.
That's a
Good point.
legit honest phone call with LBJ
Absolutely.
where it kind of makes you go like, okay, well, they're saying it like behind closed doors. They might not be voicing their opinion, which again, how many presidents later in life ended up voicing their opinion on certain things or something like that? And like Truman did about, what's his name? Dag Hammarskjöld, when the plane went down. He said, notice he was on the verge of getting something done when they killed him. Notice how I said they killed him. Like, you're like, is anybody gonna ask a follow up? I'm just asking like a small little follow up feels like the smart thing to do. But before I play these clips, is there anything you wanted to briefly mention about anything that we've kind of discussed when it comes to the shots, that the ones that missed, the Oswald accuracy, the window? You mentioned Joe Rogan. I've heard that clip before.
Yeah.
Again, he is still a conspiracy person on that. I just think when it comes to the dynamics of the shooting, he's a little bit less. Like the 6th floor is an impossibility. I don't think it's an impossibility. I haven't been there. But I think that in the heat of the moment and what was also going on around is a lot different than just looking at a photo where
Absolutely.
nothing's moving. So
the problem is that someone like Joe Rogan, who I'm assuming is a bright fella, he's not very well read on the assassination. And you can tell, the reason you can tell that is because he makes ridiculous amateur blunders when just talking about the basics of the case. He was talking about, hey, David Lifton, I guess he was an accountant or something. I read like, what? How do you, what? And that may seem like a minor thing, but it's really not. If you're really going to get into the case, you wouldn't call David Lifton an accountant, for goodness sakes. I mean, this guy studied physics at, I think, Rutgers or something like that, then went out to UCLA. And doesn't take much to figure that out. Even Wikipedia probably tells you that. So, you have to do more than read a pamphlet or as you know, Robbie, this takes years and years to sort through everything. And maybe that's our fault in the sense of maybe at the end of the day, Vincent Salandrier was right. It's a false mystery. Maybe like from day one, we should have looked at this and go, okay, that was a conspiracy, duh. And that we've allowed ourselves to get into the weeds, myself included, and spend enormous amounts of time discussing the minutia, which the case almost forces you to do, whether you want to or not. So, yeah, you can go ahead and play the clips.
I think with some I think with something like this, with history, where there's so many years after the fact, and you have many generations that are now looking at books and other things to look at. Again, this all audio evidence stuff is not well publicly known. I had so many people commenting like on LBJ stuff I was getting from LBJ Library that was released in 1990. Because who the fuck's going to go there and check LBJ? If you're a Kennedy guy, you're not checking LBJ's stuff unless it's the popular phone calls that get trending or something,
Right,
like
exactly.
about his bunghole.
Right,
But
exactly.
someone commented and was like, "Why is this all being released now? They want you they want to disinformation you." And I'm like, "No, it's because I was sipping alcohol and thought it would be cool to go on the LBJ library and try and listen to LB. You listen to so much. I've listened to at least 800 hours of this guy's tapes. I need a
Oh, I'm
drink
sure.
after some of that." And so yeah, it's interesting to me. I'm gonna play Malcolm Kilduff. Talking about so it's going to be the critic of the investigation. I'm going to also do the rejecting the single bullet theory, 3 shots lock the commission, and then we're going to go to Richard Russell and LBJ on 9/18/64. How do you make that shot then miss, and then which
Right.
bullet hit Connally?
Sure.
And then at that point, I'm going to pause it, and we're going
Okay.
to then probably bring up Connally again and just discuss some
Sure.
things about Connally.
Sounds good.
I'm also going to play a rare one that I don't think a lot of people have heard before, but there was a fight at Parkland Hospital. Malcolm Kilduff talks about it, and I don't think a lot of people know about this fight that happened. It was between a Secret Service agent and an FBI agent. There is a document you can find out there where I think it's Hoover's men apologized to one of the members of the Secret Service.
Right?
What do you know?
Why? No, I don't know. They never called me. They never questioned me. They never sent an interviewer to talk to me. And neither has this Committee on Assassinations. I made myself known to this guy Sprague way before I left Washington and said, I'll be very glad to offer you anything I can. And he said, give me a memorandum. Well, the last thing in the world I'm ever going to do with somebody, if they haven't got any more interest in what I have to say, than to say, give me a memorandum and go to hell. Because if he has specific questions, I'll be glad to answer those specific questions. But I don't know. I could write a memorandum of 2 pages, or I could write a memorandum of 200 pages, and still not cover the one obscure little item that he may be interested in, if he has any interest, or if he knows what in the hell he's looking for, which I sincerely doubt. So therefore, I absolutely refuse to just sit down and write these clowns a memorandum. But I didn't even get that much of a courtesy from the Warren Commission.
So the Warren Commission didn't bother to give Malcolm Kilduff the time to explain what he heard, even though he was riding in the motorcade, and also one of the first cars on the scene at Parkland Hospital when Kennedy was still in the car.
And at the very least, Robbie, they could have at least brought him in, sat him down, and says, "Just give me your impressions. When you think about what happened that day, what can you tell me?" But they didn't even do that.
The guy who announces the president's death doesn't bother to get questioned.
Makes no sense.
And the first one to inform LBJ that he was president.
Exactly. Yeah.
This one's called rejecting the single bullet theory.
Okay.
I do think that the Warren Commission basic findings on who fired the shot, etc., were accurate. I think the Warren Commission will tell you that one shot went through Kennedy and into Connally. I totally reject that finding. And I've talked to Governor Connally about it, and indeed it was the second shot that went into Connally because he turned around, and as he turned around, therefore the bullet entered the way it did and came out the way it did, and I've seen the scars, and there's no way that those scars could have occurred
From the one bullet.
from the one bullet and coming in unless it had decided to make a 45-degree turn.
Right.
Then the next one by Malcolm Kilduff is 3 shots lock the Warren Commission. And remember, 3 shell casings, if anybody knows, 3 shell casings were found on the floor. That means 3 shots had to be fired. I think 1 was jammed in the gun, so you couldn't do a 4th shot. You only got 3 on the floor. So that means all those 3 shots had to be able to make the damage it did to Kennedy. Now, the issue became when James Tague came out and said that a bullet had hit him in the cheek, or fragment, cement, whatever it was, hit him in the cheek. Do we know where that bullet is? I don't think so, but we have a piece of the curb that is also in the archives. So this is 3 shots lock the commission.
From the one bullet and coming in unless it had decided to make a 45-degree turn and still had the same speed, which it just plain couldn't have done. But the Warren Commission found that concluded that that was the case because they couldn't find the third bullet. They could only find two. Well, that's precious little proof on my part, because I believe the one bullet probably disintegrated, the one that hit Kennedy's head, because so much of the president's head was gone. Blazes, they found part of his head in the street on November 22nd, 1963. So why shouldn't that bullet also have been out in the street? Or parts of it, or a half of it, or a quarter of it. They found fragments of the bullet. They never found the whole bullet, so therefore they say that the third bullet didn't exist, it misfired. Well, for a man who was as accurate as Lee Harvey Oswald was in the shooting of those bullets, I don't believe that he had two direct hits and one complete miss.
Good points.
I agree.
Here's LBJ and Richard B. Russell, a member of the Warren Commission, on 9/18/64.
Well, a man's a good enough shot to put two bullets right in Kennedy. He didn't miss that old automobile and all the street. But anyhow, that's just a little thing. But
What's the net of the whole thing? What does it say? Oswald did it, and he did it for any reason?
well, just that he was a general misanthropic fellow, that he had never been satisfied anyway he was on Earth in Russia or here, and that he had a desire to get his name in history and all. I don't think you'll be displeased with the report. It's too long, but it's a whole volume.
Unanimous?
Yes, sir. I tried my best to get into this end, but they'd come around and trade me out of it by giving me a little old thread of it.
And then this is which bullet hit Connally?
Trying to prove that the same bullet that hit Kennedy first was the one that hit Connally. Went through him, through his hand, his bone, into his leg, and everything else. Just a lot of stuff there. I couldn't get all the evidence and cross-examine all of them. But I did read the record, and so I don't know. I was the only fellow there that didn't practically suggest any change whatever and what the staff had got up. This staff business always scares me. I like to put my own views down. But we've got you a pretty good report.
Well, what difference did it make which bullet got Connally?
Well, it don't make much difference, but they said that they believe that the commission believed that the same bullet that hit Kennedy hit Connally. Well, I don't believe it.
I don't either.
And so I couldn't sign it. And I said that Governor Connally testified directly to the contrary. And
All I'm saying is that's LBJ and Richard B. Russell talking about they don't believe the magic bullet theory, the whole. Okay, so a lot different than what we read, I guess, through a history book or something like that. But this is what Malcolm Kilduff was talking about a missing bullet. This is DPD officer John Weissman.
Okay.
Any other assignments that would be of interest to us?
No, sir. That's it.
Okay.
I take it back now. Buddy Walters and I did go down. Buddy found where I've shot deer rifles and hunted all my life, and supposed to be a pretty good gunman. But Buddy come and got me when he found where he thought a bullet had hit the curb down on the Elm Street triple underpass. This is where you get to the triple underpass. I went there with Buddy and looked, and it did appear that a bullet had struck the curb there and ricocheted up under that triple underpass. But we couldn't find any bullet. That's solid steel girders under there. You would never find it. But I did go down and look at that. But that's it.
So the person in that picture was taken by Jim Murray, and Jim Murray was taking this guy who literally picked up something off the ground, put it into his pocket, and walked off. And you see Buddy Walters looking at him as he's walking off. Again, that's suspicious. What was that? Could that have been evidence? I don't know. I'm going to play one other one that I had mentioned earlier that a lot of people probably haven't heard of before, but it was Malcolm Kilduff talking about the fight at Parkland Hospital between an FBI agent and a Secret Service person.
And some kind of problem back. Texas wanted control of the body to.
Oh yeah, the coroner there had attempted to hold the body for autopsy.
That occurred after you left.
That occurred after I left the hospital, but it was reported to me by the Secret Service, who had charge that the state police had come up and said, we have to hold the body here for an autopsy. And I don't know, I think it was either a left hook or a body block that took the guys out who were trying to stop the body from being removed. And I know one of the agents who did it. He's a big fellow. I wouldn't have argued with him. And they just put the body, in the hearse and took it back to the plane. And from there on, we had the chief of police of Dallas, Curry, who was aboard the plane too, and he personally granted all the permission that was necessary to remove the body from Dallas.
A lot of people don't know that Curry did that.
Yeah, they don't. You're right.
They know he's on Air Force One, but they didn't know that Curry gave the permission for the Secret Service agents to take the body back to Air Force One. Again, is that trying to hide wounds, or their mission was to get Jackie onto Air Force One because LBJ was not leaving without Jackie, and the only way Jackie was leaving was with her husband, so they had to figure out what's the best way to keep the president safe is to do this whole scenario and they definitely went a little bit overboard with everything about like the idea of flashing guns. Again, I think that comes from a story or something, because the more I hear people talk about that scenario, there was no guns being flashed. Even Earl Rose, who would have been the person getting flashed with a gun, he said that they were there, the guns, you could see them, but he was not being threatened with that. It was more about like grabbing and shoving and trying to get the body, like, we're going to take this with us. And that's kind of when Earl Rose brought up his points on things, which again, he's sides with the simple narrative of things. I do want to play this one because I think this is a good basis and primer for anyone that hears a story about something that happened on the JFK assassination. And I think they should listen to this advice and then think about it if it ever pops up.
I learned later that, a great number of people who'd known him and worked with him before he became president had called him Jack. But it always tickles me in Washington, you hear today people saying, well, I said to Jack this and I said to Jack that. Well, nobody called him Jack after he became president. The agreement among all the people, with Pierre and Kenny O'Donnell and Ted Sorensen, all the people who were really the closest to him, they all apparently met and agreed after the election that from then on they would only call him Mr. President. And I never heard, despite all these people who claim they said this to quote Jack, unquote, I never heard a member of his staff refer to him as or speak to him as anything other than the President or Mr. President, with the exception of Mrs. Kennedy, of course.
So again, I think that's important. We hear a lot of stories about JFK, and a lot of these stories start off with something like a quote like Jack told me this. And it was like, well, now we kind of have a basis that nobody called him Jack. So it was Kennedy, Mr. Kennedy, or JFK probably. So I think that's important to go by because, again, trying not to say that somebody's theory is wrong, but looking into probably what's the most factual basis of where do we go from accepting this to accepting that. What did you think about some of that stuff? Have you ever heard any of those before?
Not all, but some. I've heard some of them. It is interesting that, boy, where did you start? There was a lot there, a lot of good stuff there.
The Richard Russell phone call talking about the shot that missed, I don't think that's well publicly known.
No, not at all. I've heard the other Russell clip, but I'd never heard that one. But it makes sense, and that's always been one of my contentions. That you mean to tell me that someone fired that day, and there was a fuselage of bullets that entered into the limousine, not missed it, but entered into the limousine with really good hits and accuracy. Then all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's one shot that misses an entire road and strikes the other road, way to the left. That didn't make any sense. That never made any sense to me. And so whatever we want to talk about when it comes to the Tag incident, I don't think it was a bullet that hit, a direct bullet that hit the curb and flew up and hit him in the cheek. I think it was a fragment that ricocheted out of the car or something. Otherwise, that just doesn't make any sense at all to me. So yeah, Russell, I think, makes a very good point about that.
We're going to start talking about John Connally, like we had mentioned some things before.
Sure.
Now, John Connally was obviously disagreeing with the same bullet that hit Kennedy was the same one that hit him. We talked about that already, and also how he was still supporting the Warren Commission's findings. Do you believe that was involvement because of LBJ trying to sway his hand because he understood LBJ was under a lot of pressure on the basis that he had basically.
Sure. They were very good friends. Connally and Johnson were very good friends. And I do know, though I can't confirm this, nor can I produce any evidence, but I've heard from many people that behind the scenes, Connally said that he never believed anything about the Warren report, but he had to say that he did because he thought it would bring peace and calmness to the country. And he may be right. I don't know. I don't know what his intentions were because I never talked with him. But his other, he never did alter anything about the shots that hit him. He always said the shot that hit Kennedy did not hit me. And Connally's wife, who was right next to him, said the exact same thing. They never altered that. What they don't realize is by saying that you can't believe in the single bullet theory. But that's fine. I don't even want to quibble about that. But it's still a good point, And I think Connally's reaction inside the car. One of the things that Connally said when the shots started coming in is, "My God, they're going to kill us all," and people will grab onto, "What do you mean they?" That's obviously in the plural, so that's conspiracy. But I don't know that I would make much out of that. We don't know because Connally didn't believe a conspiracy. He thought Oswald did it alone. So obviously he didn't mean that by saying that. But it sounds like that on the surface. I just think we need to be careful what we grab and what we don't grab. And, we're all guilty of that to a certain degree, I guess. But at the end of the day, and I think one of the worst things that happens, Robbie, oddly enough, in the assassination, despite all these books behind me on the Kennedy assassination, is that once you write a book, it's like you cannot change your mind. You will dig in no matter what the evidence says. And I think that is a massive, massive mistake. If someone can show me anything in my book that is wrong, and I just assume there probably is something wrong, I'll go, okay, thank you for sharing that with me. I don't have a horse in this race that wants to defend things just because I have a book. That's ridiculous. To me, truth trumps that. And so if I made a mistake in the book, and I know people have pointed out little things in the book where I made maybe too much out of something. I went, yep, you're right, I did. But most people, once they get that book in print and they start getting royalty checks, whatever they're getting, or they become popular, man, they wouldn't change Robbie if Jesus was in front of them telling them to change it. And I think that's a mistake. That's not why we should be doing this. Unfortunately, once people go on the record for anything, they won't change their mind, and that. People they just dig in. It's like, okay, it's like you can't even talk to them. You can just see the shield go up. It's like you like to say, this isn't an interview. Let's just have a conversation. All bets off, But you don't get that out of a lot of people.
I'm going to play some Connally statements, and then I'm going to go into the HSCA actual testimony. He gave a couple press conferences where he kind of talked about things. This is, you can disagree but support the findings.
That simply because I disagree with the Warren Commission on this one detail does not mean that I disagree with the substance of their overall findings.
There was one and only one assassin.
I have no reason to question it whatsoever. I'm satisfied beyond any doubt that there was only one. I think the Commission did an outstanding job under very difficult circumstances. Men whose dedication to the task of seeking truth in these circumstances I would never question, and men whose patriotism has been manifested so many times in so many ways over such a long period of time that it is shocking to me that in the backlash of tragedy, journalistic scavengers such as Mark Lane attempt to impugn the motives of these members individually, cast doubts upon the Commission as a whole, and question the credibility of the government itself.
Just wait till he runs for election and LBJ's bitching to Cliff Carter about him writing a book. That's going to include all this. He goes, oh, God, we got Ted Sorensen writing a book, and then he's got this guy writing a book. Everybody's writing a book. Again,
Connally's arguments, by the way, are absolute, utter nonsense, Robbie. Those don't make any sense at all. If you really analyze, what does someone's patriotism have to do with anything? When you're looking at evidence, I don't care what anyone's affiliation is. I don't care what I don't care anything about that. If you just look at the raw evidence, those things don't matter. And so those things become red herrings and straw man. He commits every logical fallacy in the book. Even though I like Connally, he's been consistent. But when it comes to the stuff that you just played, those arguments are really feeble.
I've done in past episodes, so I won't play it on this one, but it was about the fight at the airport and it between being Yarborough, not about getting Connally in the car. So anyone can go listen to my episode, like 2 episodes. It was Gil Jesus or Don Jeffries. This is John Connally stating about the Dallas trip.
I was totally absorbed and consumed by all of my energies, all of my staff, with the legislative program. It was obvious, though, that we were going to have to have a trip, and I was perfectly willing at that time to undertake to organize one. But all during this period of time, it was quite clear that the president wanted to come for the purposes for which I've stated, namely to raise money, secondly to enhance his political fortunes in Texas. And I must say that at that point in time, I don't remember the figures exactly, but the president was not extremely popular in Texas, nor was he in the country. He wasn't unpopular. They had had a very bitter campaign in 1960. He carried Texas by 46,000 votes, approximately 46,200 some odd votes, with Vice President Johnson on the ticket with him.
Again, there's two kind of things there. One, I'm always seeing comments of people saying, how could you say Connally or how could you say Kennedy wasn't that popular? A lot of people were choosing Goldwater. A lot of people were more on Goldwater's side or going against somebody against Kennedy. Specifically like Gary Aguilar, who was one of the biggest medical researchers in the JFK community, one of the authoritative experts, talked about being a Goldwater man. So again, these are things that kind of, I don't think get really mentioned a lot just because people tend to have their own beliefs on certain things. I'm going to go back to Connally making statements.
In the backlash of tragedy, journalistic scavengers such as Mark Lane attempt to impugn the motives of these members individually, cast doubts upon the commission as a whole, and question the credibility of the government itself. We should turn our attention to doing a little research on and evaluation of the credentials of the self-appointed experts who, with no evidence, no new facts, nevertheless use distortion, inference, innuendo in order to cast doubts and create confusion. Now, I think it's time that we pause and reflect on who these individuals are, rather than calling for a further investigation of the assassination, which in my judgment is neither warranted, justified, or desirable.
Again, this is the same thing you can use to the other side. How about we look up the interviews of our, Richard Russell talking at Face the Nation, talking about how much more troops we're going to have to send over there to maintain a presence in Vietnam, or the number of millions of dollars it's going to cost per week just to maintain a presence in Vietnam, or talk about how he doesn't think the war is going to end until we go over there and we have every single man fighting to make sure we squash out this communistic threat. That's a guy who was on the Warren Commission that a lot of JFK researchers patriot around like some type of hero for just disagreeing on certain things. That guy was well.
Oh, yeah. Or Russell's anti-integration racist comments, for goodness sakes. Holy smoke. I mean, really? I would say to John Connally, be careful what you ask for, my friend, because Russell does not come out smelling very well if you want to go down that road. Or what's his name? Went completely blank. Former head of the CIA, who was one of the seven.
Alan Dulles.
Yeah, Dulles. I mean, really? You want to go down that road, Connally?
MK Ultra, the fact that he started that up.
Like, are you serious?
Not only started that up, but also involved his own son into MK Ultra.
Absolutely. So when Connally starts talking like that, to me, he just he wants to sound good for whatever reason, and there's a part of me, I guess, that gets it, but he's just dead wrong. I mean, those types of logical analysis are just beyond ridiculous, for goodness sake. And I don't think that Mark Lane, who may not have gotten everything right, who does? I think he was just trying to look at the evidence. So when he says, we need, look at the evidence, again, Connally, this is not going to end well for you if you want to look at the evidence, because the evidence to me is overwhelming that you're wrong. That it wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald or some lone nut. The evidence does not speak to that at all.
For me, it's funny if you look at the similarities between RFK and JFK. Let's say we had Connally that was the opposite of what Paul Schrade was to RFK.
You're exactly right. Yeah.
A guy who got hit and talked about that he believes that there was more than one shooter.
I never thought about that before. That's an interesting comparison. Compare Connally to Paul Schrade. Yeah, that's very interesting.
I'm surprised. I bet Connolly must have voiced some type of opinion on something when it came later, but I think he was just so involved in LBJ. Again, one thing I should have played in the beginning because I feel like this is going to help a lot of people just understand. And I'm sure a lot of people already know this already, but it was Malcolm Kilduff talking about Kennedy not being a part of their club.
It's unfortunate, but I think it has to be said that Kennedy was never regarded as a member of what is affectionately known as the club on the Hill. When he was a senator, he stayed somewhat to himself. He did not play the "you scratch my back, I scratch yours" game as the other 99 might have. Therefore, he was not, even though he had been a member of the Senate, was not regarded by other members of the Senate.
It's of the Senate, right?
As some of the take people like Eastland and
Richard Russell,
Dick Russell of Georgia, people of that ilk, Stu Symington, and even Henry Jackson. It just didn't work out that way. He just so therefore, when he went to the White House, the power of the presidency was probably less than he thought it was.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, that's a very interesting clip.
Kennedy was never regarded as a member of what is affectionately known.
He said it
as
a couple times. These interviews are kind of similar.
When he was a senator, he stayed somewhat to himself. He did not play the "you scratch my back, I scratch yours" game as the other 99 might have. I don't know that the Kennedy staff fully appreciated until years later the great ability of Lyndon Johnson in this regard. Here, the Kennedy White House had an ideal opportunity through the proper use, and I hate to use that word, but it's true, the proper use of the vice president as a member of the Senate Club to get things that they could never get done on their own, and they didn't get done on their own. Major civil rights legislation, for instance, didn't go through until Johnson. And how did Johnson do it? He did it by going up to the Hill and sitting down at night with these guys and bumping heads together. Oh, yeah, he'd go up there. He'd go up there and sit down over a bottle of bourbon. Kennedy didn't do that.
Again, he makes a very great point about that. I've had a lot of people who are historians of the Vietnam War, and they talk about LBJ in a higher regard than a lot of JFK researchers do. And again, not stating that LBJ was a great guy or anything like that. He just knew
good
politics.
Politician, though. Yeah, good politician.
If I can honestly, hold on, see if I can search it up real quick.
How many clips do you have, Robbie? I mean, altogether on your website? Man, these are good.
A lot of clips. I want to play this. There's kind of two, but I'm only going to play one. John McCone described Johnson in a way that I think we all need to kind of, and it's honestly probably the best take I've ever heard on Johnson. He was also a fan of Robert Kennedy more than he was of Jack, which is interesting.
Right. It is.
But he states, I think this is the clip, is the one about Johnson was many things.
Johnson was a legislator. He had had long experience in the Congress, both in the House and in the Senate. But when it came to being an executive as president, I don't think he performed very well.
I guess he was first and last a politician, wasn't he? That always came first.
Oh yes, he was that always.
Yeah.
Always.
First
in many ways, a very engaging man.
Now, another thing, the crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight. So when you make them up, give me an inch that I can let out there, because they cut me. They're just like riding wire fence. These are the best that I've had anywhere in the United States. Let's see if you can't leave me about an inch from where the zipper ends, round under my back to my bunghole.
Again, Johnson was more of a politician. He understood that game. Kennedy was good at foreign policy. He had been to other countries. Johnson did too, but Johnson got in a lot of trouble for just doling out T-shirts and all these things and buying objects for people on his planes and stuff like that. And people gave him criticism saying he's trying to bribe politicians. He didn't understand the game of politics. There's a thing that Malcolm Kilduff states, I'll play it later on, but about informal press conferences. Johnson did one press conference in the stateroom or something like that Kennedy always performed in. And he said, I'm never doing it again, because he was tired of being compared to Kennedy. And so he would take walks, and it would be very hard. You'd have like 18 reporters asking him questions, not knowing who the hell was talking or what questions were being asked, barely hearing the right thing. And then they'd go off and write 18 different stories about the same event, but they're all different. That's why we don't have transcripts on those meetings either, because Malcolm Kilduff stated it was so difficult, because he would just go off, and he liked to sit down with the press and get them beer and do things where he could make them feel at home and comfortable. That's a lot of his 63 and 64 phone calls are dealing with domestic issues. Think that's what he thought the presidency was. And then 65 and 66, we see him talking about the Vietnam War and now starting to get involved in being fed the wrong information. I think it was Walt Rustow talked about the president wanted to start pulling out troops, talking about LBJ. And Walt Rustow said, I disagreed, but I wasn't going to resign because he was the one that the people elected. And it's like a lot of these people, Robert McNamara, people that were apparently like people that get talked about pulling out of Vietnam, they were the ones that apologized later for feeding Johnson the wrong information and making him hike up the war. They did. So again, it's not saying anything. Like a lot of people bring up that LBJ killed Kennedy because he wanted the Vietnam War to happen so he could profit. LBJ found a way to profit. He made Harold Byrd and so many other people get weapon contracts. They made lots and lots and lots of money. So it's not really a question of who was behind it. It's more of about looking at Johnson a little bit differently than maybe him being behind it, but being someone that's going to make the best of a bad scenario.
Yep.
I want to play the Dallas trip now with, I think I played that one, didn't I? Of why Kennedy came to Dallas. Yeah. To make, all those fun
yeah.
dinners.
He had Connally.
All right. So this one is going to be the reason for Dallas.
I must say that at that point in time, I don't remember the figures exactly, but the president was not extremely popular in Texas, nor was he in the country. He wasn't unpopular. They had had a very bitter campaign in 1960. He'd carried Texas by 46,000 votes, approximately 46,200 some odd votes, with Vice President Johnson on the ticket with him. So it had been an extremely close, extremely hard-fought election. The president had brought great elan, he brought great culture, he brought great dignity and excitement to the White House. But in spite of that, his legislative program had not fared all that well. He was not all that popular in the country, and his popularity had diminished considerably, as a matter of fact. And he was already looking at 1964 and the campaign of 1964.
Oh, we never played this one. Hang on.
You said that you received a number of letters that in some way or other faulted you, the assassination. Have these letters?
My dear friends,
no, those letters.
To greet all of you.
Those letters have stopped. I've not received any such letters in several months now, and I never worried about them, particularly in relation to me. I worried about them only in the sense that I think they reflected a strange attitude in the minds of so many people in the country. I was concerned from that standpoint, but not because the letters themselves accused me of being responsible for the president's tragic death, just because I was riding with him.
Interesting.
That's not why you're being held responsible. The reason why John Connally sounds truthful, but also sounds like he's lying, is the fact that there were many questions raised to him by the HSCA about protection for the president. He was more concerned about the president being beaten down from the energy that it costs to do a motorcade and travel all these different trips to make different press conferences, but never thought to think about if a person was going to take a shot at him after the General Walker shooting and after the Adlai Stevenson incident. This is what Samuel Devine asked him. He didn't have an excuse. He fumbled those words. He said, I let my people take care of it. So were you still obsessed with your election, which is why you opposed a motorcade in the first place? Was because you were trying to wait until all your votes got settled and you could primarily focus on this? Again, the lying is the factor of his negligence in protecting the president. There was a bit of a, not saying a lack of care, but he was more focused on himself and what he was going to be doing, which again, this is the problem with a lot of this stuff. Now, this is called choosing the time for Dallas.
And he said, well, all right, what do you suggest? And at that point, I said, well, I would suggest, we've been given a lot of thought to it. I'd talk to the state chairman. I'd talk to members of the legislature. I'd talk to a number of the other political leaders in the state. And I told him that I thought we ought to have a number of non-political events for him to go to, that we ought to try to hit the major cities of Texas, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Antonio. And that we ought to culminate it with a dinner in Austin. We didn't go over all the details at this particular visit, but that was a general outline of what I had proposed to him. He said, all right, well, you work it out and get in touch with, as I recall, he said, Kenny O'Donnell, and we'll help work this out, and we'll pick a date. And obviously, we were saying to him that he would have to pick the date of the visit.
Kennedy suggested things like going in August, which was a bad time to go because if people were vacationing, it was just not a good season for it. Then he suggested Lyndon Johnson's birthday, which Connally quickly disarmed and said you cannot have it on LBJ's birthday. I think in his head, he knew that would be really, really a quick way to anger Johnson, is if you decided to do that. I wanted to play this one, many involved in the Dallas trip.
There were 8 or 10 of us who spent a great deal of time on it.
Let me ask Mrs. Connally, were you involved in that process too?
Yes, I certainly was.
What was your role?
I was shining that mansion up like you never saw. We were trying to get everything ready at the governor's mansion for our first visit from a president and his lady. So I had all the hassles of any housewife trying to get her house in order so it would be just right for the very special guest.
I think to put it in a little different context, I think the first thing we agreed on, and Nellie certainly was involved in intimate detail with the trip, because the one thing we'd agreed on, we were going to try to wind up with the fundraising affair in Austin, Texas.
Another one when it comes to Connally that I think is important is Kennedy's supporters were not my supporters.
President Kennedy's strongest supporters were not my strongest supporters. I had developed a base of support among the moderates and the conservatives in the state and the Democratic Party, whereas the people that had been most enthusiastic about President Kennedy really had supported my opponent, at least in the primary and in the runoff elections. Most of them supported me in the general election in 1962. So if the president came, and the mere fact that he did come, and my association with him, and the fact that I had helped plan the trip, that I would be with him, that Ms. Connally and I would be with him, obviously was going to inure to my benefit, it seems to me, among the people who most supported President Kennedy. So there was never any question really about my thinking was not that influenced by whether or not I was going to benefit or not benefit.
It didn't sound like that, though.
No, it didn't.
It definitely sounded like he was looking at an aspect of what was going to be benefiting him for this.
Yep.
Again, this is, I mean, what do you think so far about what we played? Because I can just keep rambling about stuff.
Well, the Connolly's interesting. When Connally, talks about what he thinks happens inside the limousine, I think he's very accurate and very precise. His logic tends to go off the rails, not understanding why that dethrones the single bullet theory. But you're right. When you start talking about other things, it's almost like he's a different person, very, very kind of self-absorbed. How's it going to affect him? Yeah, I get it. Yeah, he or when he's attacking the critics and things like that, it's like you make so many logical missteps. But when he's talking simply about what happened inside the limousine, I think he's probably pretty accurate.
This is disagreements on the Dallas motorcade.
Right.
Conversations occur where there were disagreements as to at least the emphasis that should be placed in various aspects.
That's Gary Cornwall talking.
Very few of them with me. I was meeting intermittently with these 8 or 9 people that I had working on this trip, but
who were your people meeting with?
They were meeting with Hal Bruno, the president's advance man. We were getting information from all kind of sources. We were getting direct calls from the top labor leaders in the state and others. We were getting a considerable feedback and frankly, a considerable differences developed between the president's advance men and the people I had working on the trip, and to the point where it got a bit testy.
I want to know what a bit testy means.
Yeah, me too.
He's talking about, he said Hal Bruno, it's Jerry Bruno is the person that he's talking about. He ends up correcting himself later, but he was talking about that they wanted to decide whether the women's building or the Trade Mart. And the Secret Service thought the women's building would be better because there's better ways, angles and stuff to protect the president. And honestly, it was brought up by Samuel Devine and Richardson Pryor was that if they chose the Trade Mart, would they go through Dealey Plaza? I mean, not Trade Mart, women's building, would they go through Dealey Plaza? And again, they wouldn't have to. They could have stayed on Stemmons Freeway, so then we wouldn't even have the whole situation of passing the Texas School Book Depository. Another thing with how many people were involved in the meeting on the trip, this became an issue because Johnson talked to his advisors, Kennedy talked to his advisors, and anyone in that room talked to their people, and that's when they think that the motorcade route got published or was talked about to the press. Johnson was well known for speaking to press at his ranch and just doing everything he possibly can to be in the press limelight as much as Kennedy was in the press limelight. So again, that could have been a slip up. It could have been a certain assistant that directed that or had that happen. It became then an ulterior motive with would Oswald have enough time after that publication to know that route was going to be, because I think there was multiple routes published, but only one of them got it right. And I think it was the Dallas Morning News.
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing. The trip really had been announced probably 4 or 5 months before it happened. They knew it was going to go down. What happened with the Dallas newspapers is you had a general view of the motorcade route and a very specific one. It wasn't like one was wrong and one was right, as much as one was just very general and vague. The other one was very specific. I don't think there was anything to that necessarily.
This is Samuel Devine from the HSCA asking Connally about violence in Dallas.
But earlier that you thought perhaps it would be well to avoid the motorcade because of the very trying day that the president was going through, the number of appearances he had to make, the number of speeches he had to make, and the pressures. Did you have any reason to believe that there might have been some incident on a motorcade route?
None at all, Congressman Devine, none at all.
You had no prior information that would suggest that there may have been problems?
None at all.
I think that there was some testimony that there were some, I don't think they used the word kooks, but some extremists that perhaps might display signs or make remarks that might be embarrassing to the president.
Well, when I said not at all, I was speaking in terms of I had no indication, no knowledge, no reason to suspect that there would be any acts of violence. I assumed from the very beginning that when the president came, that somewhere along the route, San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth, Dallas, Austin, somewhere, that there might be pickets, there might be some embarrassing signs or something of that kind. Yes, I did assume that we would encounter that. And frankly, we encountered only one that I remember, and that's far less than I anticipated.
The one he's talking about, what he remembers, is one that was passing by, and it was on, the JFK was on the right, so the sign was on the left, and it said, "Kennedy, go home." And then he states that he was hoping the president didn't see it, and then the president just lurched forward in between Nellie and John and go, "Did you see that man's sign back there?" And they said, "Yes, Mr. President, I was hoping you wouldn't see it." And he goes, "You think that man's a nice fella?" And then everyone in the room in the HSCA laughed.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Again, John Connally's pretty good at being a people person. A lot
He
when
is.
it comes to talking about these types of things. You find yourself being swayed to a lot of what Connally was talking about. But I'm going to play the threats. It's Samuel Devine again talking about the threats that John Connally should have been aware about, that he should have discussed with the Secret Service.
At any juncture during the planning and scheduling, did you specifically discuss with the Secret Service what possible harm might come to the president, and if so, from what source? Either you or your people.
Congressman, I don't think so. I don't know. Some of our people might have raised that point with the Secret Service, but I doubt it, because in none of our discussions or planning sessions did we dwell on that subject or make any point of it. It really was not a matter that we were fearful of, frankly.
But if you had had your way, there would have been no motorcade through the downtown area. You would have gone directly to the
trademark.
Trademark, right?
Sure. As a matter of fact, it was quite a point of dispute, as I say, and we never did agree to it. And finally, they not only said we're going to have a motorcade, but we're going to publish the route of it.
And I said, "That's crazy." That's what he ends with.
Yeah.
Again, that's a big mistake, really, publishing the motorcade.
Oh, absolutely. That's a disaster.
I'm gonna try. I might have to edit this part out because I need to find the perfect clip for it.
The one that looked like you almost played was the Garrison clip.
Yeah, there's a couple of those.
Well, if there's one thing that the assassination community, those who believe in the conspiracy, are divided over, it's the Jim Garrison thing.
Yeah, he's a controversial figure.
Boy, you aren't kidding.
Because I think he did manipulate some things to get his point, but we don't have to talk about that. What is it?
I didn't go at the time. There was a big argument about whether we go to the women's building or the trademark. I didn't go to either one of them at the time. Most of these arguments arose at staff level, and then those that they couldn't settle, I'd finally hear about and get a hold of, and sometimes I'd just make a decision we were going to do thus and so, and sometimes I'd call somebody at the White House and get it worked out, but this went on constantly.
In any event, either building the motorcade would have had to go through some part of Dealey Plaza.
Well, I think, in any event, the motorcade certainly would have gone through downtown. It would not necessarily have had to go through Dealey Plaza, no, sir. If the women's building had been chosen, it could have gone another route, and probably would have gone another route.
Well, that's a big one right there.
Yeah, that is.
The trademarks, so the reason why.
Right.
This one right here, Samuel Devine.
I suppose you were also, at least in the back of your mind, aware of the incident that had occurred to Ambassador Stevenson, as well as General Walker.
Yes, sir.
And these were matters of concern to you, but you still had no anticipation that anything of violence might occur. Is that
correct? Sir. And my objection to the motorcade really was not based on any apprehension of violence, Congressman Devine, at all. It was, as I've testified, merely in order to try to save the president the wear and tear of a motorcade. And
at any juncture during the planning and scheduling, did you specifically discuss with the Secret Service what possible harm might come to the president, and if so, from what source? Either you or your people.
Congressman, I don't think so. I don't know. Some of our people might have
We've heard that part already.
The Secret Service, but
a lot of this stuff, again, you're looking at like 60-second clips sometimes with the YouTube shorts.
Interesting that Curry, Jesse Curry, knew that the FBI knew that Oswald was working in the Texas School Book Depository. So even though I don't think Oswald really did anything, but the fact that someone who had defected to the Soviet Union and supposedly had renounced his citizenship, at least verbally, that was okay. And they didn't think that would be okay to maybe share that with the Dallas police is a little odd, to say the least.
This one is why didn't he ask LBJ? Was asked to Connally during the HSCA.
Well, if then he basically needed someone to help with the planning arrangements to achieve the ends that he sought, which was fundraising and improving his political posture in the state. Why didn't he just ask the vice president, who was also from Texas, to arrange those matters for him?
Well, for the simple reason that I had been able to build a pretty successful organization in Texas, and the governor is the titular head of the party of his state, and frankly, the governor of any state, regardless of his party, Republican or Democrat, is the titular head of the party, and he sets the political tone of the state. And it would be inconceivable, and President Kennedy was too good a politician to try to come to Texas without my wholehearted support, or at least tacit approval, and the vice president certainly would not have done it.
He does a lot of what LBJ does, where when Kennedy's dead, he starts using Kennedy's name to get people onto his side. And then again, him complimenting Kennedy there just so it's I don't know, gets people on his side, I guess. It's a little gross, but you hear it a lot. Like, I don't think Kennedy was too smart of a politician, or Kennedy was too charismatic of a person to have me care so much about threats to his life. It's like, what are you saying now?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think he feels that way at all.
No, not at all.
I'm going to play this. I'm going to play the PBS commentary on John Connally. Okay. This is Sanford J. Unger and Jeremiah O'Leary.
The testimony of John Connally, who was the governor of Texas at the time of the assassination. He's been telling us in minute detail about the planning of the president's trip to Texas in 1963. I'm here in Sanford Unger, here this morning with Jeremiah O'Leary of the Washington Star and Paul Hope of the Assassination Information Bureau for this PBS coverage of the House Assassination Committee hearings. The testimony, gentlemen, this morning of Governor Connally certainly was the testimony of a politician. I couldn't decide whether it was the politician from 1963 or the politician from 1978. What did you think, Jerry?
Sandy, it appears to me that Governor Connally was doing two things. He was giving us a primer course in Texas politics, and at the same time was in some manner attempting to project himself and his wife as the highly interesting people they undoubtedly are. But I think he's telling us more than we really want to know.
Everything but his shirt size.
Everything but his shirt size.
Why wouldn't he? Years later, it means so much more now that we can understand the climate and the political kind of divide that was going on between all of these guys.
I agree.
I want to play, before I get to this part, I want to play the shots first when the motorcade, what happened to the motorcade, because I think that's important, because we're skipping around here. Sorry for the lack of structure on this one.
No, I like this, actually.
Reactions inside the limousine.
He said nothing. He just sort of slumped down in the seat. John had turned to his right also when we heard that first noise and shouted, "No, no, no," and in the process of turning back around so that he could look back and see the president, I don't think he could see him when he turned to his right. The second shot was fired and hit him. He was in the process of turning, so it hit him through this shoulder, came out right about here. His hand was either right in front of him or on his knee as he turned to look, so that the bullet went through him, crushed his wrist, and lodged in his leg.
But the problem with that is that I don't think that's exactly what happened. I think half of it's true. But there was never a bullet that lodged in his left femur. It was a fragment that they actually left there and never even removed. There was never a bullet of any size at all that was ever in John Connally's leg. So whatever it was that went in his leg was a fragment that shattered probably from the wrist shot. Though I think the wrist shot comes later. I don't think they're the same thing.
I was being a participant. I can only give you my impressions, but I must say to you, as I said to the Warren Commission, I do not believe, nor will I ever believe, that I was hit with the first bullet. I don't believe it. I heard the shot. I heard the first shot. I reacted to the first shot. And I was not hit with that bullet. Now, a great deal of speculation that the President and I were hit with the same bullet. That might well be, but it surely wasn't the first bullet. And Nellie doesn't think it's the second bullet. I don't know. I didn't hear the second bullet. I felt the second bullet. We obviously weren't hit with the third bullet. I was down, reclining in her lap at the time the third bullet hit. I'm sorry.
Interesting.
I think I got Nellie's opinion
Yeah.
in here. Should be right about.
I believe you testified in response to Mr. Cornwell that you heard only two shots. They came from behind, and there was not any from any other direction. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Mrs. Connally, would you also make the same statement?
Except that I heard all three.
Is it possible that there could have been more than three shots, as far as your recollection is concerned?
I guess anything's possible,
Yes.
but I heard three shots.
You heard three, definitely no less, and probably no more. Is that right?
That's all I heard.
And Governor Connally, you said that you heard two shots, and the one that hit you, you apparently did not hear.
That's correct.
I would take it then by negative implication that you heard no shots coming from your right front.
No, sir, I did not.
In the area that has often been described as the grassy knoll.
No, sir. And I don't believe any came from there.
We responded to all these shots. So if something came from the front, we certainly would have responded to a noise from the front.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand one statement. You said that Mrs. Connally doesn't agree it was the second bullet or the same bullet?
The second bullet.
The second bullet?
That's what?
That hit me.
It was
that
the second.
that hit him and me.
No, I thought I heard three shots. I had three reactions, three separate reactions. First shot, and I looked and saw the president. Second shot, John. And the third, all this matter all over it.
So you agree that your recollection was the second shot that hit the governor?
I know it was the second shot that hit the governor.
And where you disagree as to the possibility or the question of whether or not it was the same bullet that hit. Is that accurate?
Interesting. I don't know. I'm kind of like it's weird. Bless you.
Yeah.
It's weird with them because it's like then they were asked again like how familiar are you with guns? Like this I think it's this one.
Shot that you heard is the one you believe hit Governor Connally.
I know it hit Governor Connally.
And then after you knew that he was hit and you pulled him over in your lap, you then heard the third shot.
Yes.
And again from over your right shoulder?
Yes.
Did you look back at that time?
I never looked back after John was hit.
Have you had any experience at all with firearms over the years? Would you say in your judgment that the shots that you heard or the shots that you heard were from a rifle or a handgun?
Oh, no, I'm not that much of a...
You don't know, but...
And I'm not expert at all.
All right.
All right. I want to play the Garrison clips, but I also want to play this kind of important thing about Oswald, who knew Governor Connally.
Mr. Connally, I mentioned his name only because Lee was correspondent at one time in his life with Governor Connally.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about that? What had he in effect said about Governor Connally?
Not very much. I just learned from him when we were in Russia that he did write Governor Connally for some legal matter. I think about his him coming back to the United States or have something to do with the service. I do not recall what it was. Then we received a letter from Governor Connally, and Lee pointed out the envelope with the instead of a stamp, it was Mr. Connolly's picture on it, and he explained to me that's how people who wants to be elected, it's a form of advertisement before election or something like that.
Did this have something to do with the type of a discharge that he had, which he was dissatisfied with?
Well, at the time, I thought it was just a matter of getting entrance visa or permission to enter United States again. That's what I thought at the time.
What were you saying, Tim?
Oh, that was the famous letter that Oswald supposedly sent Connally to get an upgrade on his discharge from the Marines.
And again, Marina Oswald also stated something about that they could have been shooting at John because of the fact that he might have been denied. This is John Connally testifying about the 3 shots.
As we turned to go down to enter the freeway, the first inkling that, of course, that I had that anything was amiss, I heard a shot, what I thought was a shot. Others said a sound, but I thought it was a shot. I'd heard too many rifle shots in my life not to be able to identify one, and no thought crossed my mind except that it was a rifle shot. I was conscious then of hearing a third shot. I say a third shot. I was not conscious really of hearing the second shot, the bullet that hit me. I very clearly heard the third one. They were coming in very rapid fire order, and I knew as a result of the third shot that someone certainly, and I assume the president, had been hit a fatal blow.
Again, he says rapid succession. That's a little bit different because people talk about the first shot being spaced out from the next 2. But if he only heard,
right, there's usually like
shot.
There's like a 4.8 second gap between the first fuselage of bullets and the second. Like there's 2 rounds that come into the car with about a 4.8 second differential between the 2. And when Connally says he didn't hear the second shot, that actually makes sense because the shot that hit him, the speed of the bullet would have been faster than the speed of sound, so he wouldn't have heard the shot that hit him. They've been too traumatized, I would imagine. But what's interesting is even though he's hit, falls into his wife's lap, then he still is cognizant enough that he hears the third shot. It's kind of interesting.
I'm going to play this. Garrison has claimed that, and it's an LBJ and John Connally on 3/2/67.
About 5 minutes.
Sure.
All day today, I have been interviewed up here. They're continually breaking stories on this conspiracy thing, based on what this fellow from the PA in New Orleans talked about, named Garrison. I have just been interviewed again, and of course, I just simply say I know nothing about it. But a newsman named Paul Smith has just been here to interview me again. They have a long story on the radio tonight over WINS, news radio station here in New York. Charlie Payne is the general manager. He talks to me off and on all day, trying to keep me focused on it. They supposedly have a story from a man who saw the files in Garrison's office. He is the DA in New Orleans. I don't have the whole story, but here's what they say. That Garrison has information that he can prove. before assassination in the United States, sent here by Castro, or Castro's people, not by Castro himself, but one of his lieutenants.
Sorry,
Interesting.
the tape quality's crap, so it's hard. The subtitles won't pick up Connally's voice on some of the words, but
Sure.
this one's 3-2-67.
The inference was very clear. The inference was that it was his brother ordered the CIA to send a team into Cuba to assassinate Castro.
We've had that story on about 3 occasions. The people here say that there's no basis for it. I've given a lot of thought to it. One of Hoffa's lawyers went to one of our mutual friends, asked him to come and relay that to us. Pearson came to me, Drew Pearson, told me that the lawyer, Edward Morgan here, had told him the same thing and said that they would plead to, they would tell all the story after November when the limitation ran. I don't know. Our lawyers said they couldn't believe that there's any limitation on conspiracy, but
This clip right here is nothing to the Garrison story. It's LBJ and John Connally.
There's not anything to the Garrison story. At least Hoover says so, as near as he can tell. He says that they interviewed Ferry, and they interviewed this other fellow very carefully and closely, and the fellow claims that he got a call from Oswald, but that they can't find any record of it, and the doctor that had him under surveillance said that he wasn't in a position to talk on November the 23rd. He's under very heavy sedation, and that the Shaw thing is a phony, and that Ferry died of natural causes, and that that was a phony, but that some of these same sources that prevent trying to involve this jail thing have been feeding stuff to Garrison as they did here. I don't know whether there's any basis for it or not.
At this point, we have kind of showed a lot of clips about John Connally and LBJ. We've talked a lot about John Connally's testimony and Nellie Connally's testimony. Do you think the HSCA was asking good questions throughout on some of the clips that I played?
I think in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. I think, as what's his name from PBS said, there seemed to be a lot of footage just talking about Texas politics, which, of course, this is supposed to be an investigation into the assassination. Whether Nellie Connally is gussying up the mansion or not doesn't have a whole lot to do with that. You may have a little of that, and that's okay, but I think there was way too much time spent on things that led up to the assassination that, the questions could have been a lot better for Connally. No question about that.
Do you think that he was being honest in his statements, or do you think he was trying to cover the aspect that he wasn't, I don't know, he wasn't paying attention to his job, clearly, at least certain aspects of it when it comes to protection of the president, as much as he's trying to feel like he isn't involved or people are blaming him. You saw him tear up when people are blaming him for Dallas. I don't think he's necessarily immediate to blame, but he definitely should have had more care when it came to protection of the president. Him talking about caring about the president being exhausted from a motorcade, I could not believe that after you don't look at the Adelie and General Walker events that even Samuel Devine of the HSCA brought up.
Yeah, the idea of not putting a little more stock into whether it is General Walker or Adlai Stevenson. I mean, you have to take those things seriously, however you look at it. I mean, I agree. And he had to know that the route would have been congested. I mean, all kinds of things going on there that I think he should have paid a little more attention to. Am I blaming him? No, I'm not blaming him, but I'm saying I agree. He didn't seem to take those types of things seriously at all.
And other members of like Malcolm Kilduff and other people, Pierre Salinger, not Pierre, Kenneth O'Donnell and others had voiced already apprehension of going to Dallas. Like, maybe we should be very careful here. Dallas is already kind of a rough climate. And again, Malcolm Kilduff is a Texan. So, he was trying to at least tell people like, hey, like this is something we should probably be looking at. Why are they aware of it and Connally, the one who's in charge of all this, not thinking about that?
I agree. I agree. And why he is not taking. I mean, what I would have liked to have heard Connally say is, yeah, you're right. And even if it's in hindsight, we should have been a little more careful about things. But for him to blow it off and act like, well, no, we were fine. No, you weren't fine. How do we know he wasn't fine? Because he was killed. Obviously things weren't fine. The climate was terrible in Dallas.
Again, and then they talk about the driver did it aspect, and they talk about why the Secret Service didn't have a reaction. The driver's at fault for stopping the limousine twice and then finally speeding off. Roy Kellerman, I think I've heard the excuse, which he did say, we got to get out of here in the car. That was from Nellie and John's testimony. But they also talked about that there was that bar that sat up in front, and it would have been hard for Roy Kellerman to jump back and do what Rufus Youngblood did to LBJ. Yeah. So again, that makes a lot of sense. I do believe that. But again, he didn't move at all.
No, he didn't move 1 inch.
Connally was the only one, and Sawyer gave him a lot of like credit to it. Was the only one that could identify it was a rifle shot, and he wrung out Rowley's Secret Service for that. He said, "How could Connally know what a rifle shot is, but your Secret Service don't know what a rifle shot is? Is this how we expect them to protect our president?" Like it's again, that's very, very serious. And then again, we get the brain tissue and other things that were involved in the limousine that we obviously
It is odd, Robbie. You're right that Roy Kellerman doesn't move 1 inch to protect the president. Nothing. And the fact that the driver, Greer, turned around twice, that we have it on the Zapruder film. And true, the limousine weighed, with everybody in there, that limousine weighed almost 10,000 pounds. So you're not going to be able to speed out of there like you're on a moped or something. Granted. But the reaction time is at best pathetic. And frankly, I agree. Though, should Kellerman have tried to do something? Yeah, but he did absolutely nothing, which is just odd.
Do you think that there could have been a good reaction of the Secret Service in that amount of time to elapse where the shots were fired? I tend to think that they wouldn't have really time to do anything but just move a couple of inches. But just seeing that movement shows that they were on the route of doing something. Rowley kind of brought it up to Clint Hill being the best representative that the Secret Service did act appropriately. It's like, well, you had one guy that acted appropriately. You didn't have the whole field of people besides Rufus Youngblood jumping over top LBJ. That's about it. But even Malcolm Kilduff states that his press car went around LBJ's car. It was like LBJ's car was just stopped in the middle of the road.
Right, that's true.
He was able to literally swerve around LBJ's car and get to Parkland Hospital.
Yeah. And I don't know that they would have been able. I mean, Kennedy himself said if someone wants to kill the president, they probably will be able to do it. So, yeah, I don't think you can say, well, if the Secret Service is doing their job, there should never be a situation where the president is assassinated. I don't believe that. Nobody's that good. Should they have reacted? Yes, they should have reacted better than they did. But I'm not sure great reaction would have stopped the assassination. I really don't.
Is there anything you felt like that you might have seen with the HSCA that I haven't shown already?
Not really. I mean, if I really had time to think about it, I may be able to come up with something. But man, your clips are really good, and the clips you're showing aren't clips you see all the time, as you know.
Yeah, we I think I got one more on here. I got a couple more actually. John Sherman Cooper. I totally forgot about.
When you bring up Cooper, what reminds me is I think one of the mistakes the HSCA made was when they interviewed people, they would have all of them in the room at the same time. And so they're just going to agree with each other. That no one's going to disagree. That was a massive, massive mistake. Never should there have been more than one person in the room at a time. But as you know, they didn't do that. And even with the firearms committee, you mentioned Monty Lutz. There was 4 of those guys, if not 5, if I'm not mistaken, all sit at the table at the same time. They're not going to disagree with each other. And so you're not going to get real honesty if you have it set up like that.
One thing I will mention, and I think it gets brought up a lot when people talk about LBJ being behind it, I can just see the comments now, was the famous Wink photograph.
Yes, right.
One thing I'll mention that's interesting is that was Thomas Albert.
Yep.
That winked. He rode
Thomas
on Air Force One with JFK to Dallas.
And
he left on Air Force One with LBJ.
Yeah, Albert Thomas was he was from Texas. because there was a dinner, if I'm not mistaken, that they did in honor of Elbert Thomas because of NASA or something like that.
No, he had cancer.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, Thomas Albert dinner was he had cancer.
Oh, I thought that was something to do with NASA.
No, at least from what I've heard, it was like a cancer dinner type thing, and then he ended up staying on for LBJ. But again, he would have just rode with LBJ if he was LBJ's man. He wouldn't have just gone off and rode on Air Force One with Kennedy.
Yeah, you're right. That doesn't make any sense.
So again, look, hey, he's the president. He just became the president because the other president was killed. He's already sad and kind of looking like non-happy and chalant while he's doing his thing, and he looks over and people bring up the wink. Look, let's say you're graduating high school, a family member just died. Is your dad going to sit there and be like all sad, or is he going to be supporting you and putting on a face that you at least get the recognition that you probably should be getting when it came to just the honor of like being the president, getting inaugurated? He doesn't have that party and celebration. It seems like there's a lot of Malcolm Kilduff talked about there's been a lot of booze being on the flight, but nobody could drink.
Right.
Just because of the whole situation, nobody could really do anything. Now, I wanted to play a couple things. One thing talking about Humes, because we talked about Humes earlier. And then, but we missed kind of a certain area here when it came to Connally, which was they're going to kill us all. And then we'll play John Sherman Cooper, and then we'll get into Humes, and then that'll wrap up a lot of things.
Sure.
All right. This is They're Going to Kill Us All by John Connally.
Mm-hmm. I said first, just almost in despair, I said, no, 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 no. Just thinking how tragic it was that we'd gone through this 24 hours that had all been so wonderful and so beautifully executed. The president had been so marvelously received, and then here at the last moment, this great tragedy. And I just said, no, 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 no. And then I said, right after I was hit, I said, my God, they're going to kill us all. The shots came, in my judgment, the two shots I heard came from the same direction, back over my right shoulder, came from behind us. I don't think any shots came from any other direction.
Was he aware that Kennedy might have been shot at? Because why would you say, oh my God, they're going to kill us all?
Yeah, I agree. It is a strange thing to say. I don't know how much we can make out of it, but it is an odd thing to say. And since he's already in his wife's lap, he's been shot. When Kennedy gets the headshot at Zapruder frame 313, I'm not sure how you could determine what direction that shot came from in that situation. So while his testimony may be sincere.
Well, when he said it came over from his right shoulder, if he turned around looking back at JFK, does that mean his right shoulder would be the front?
Exactly.
There's this one with John Sherman Cooper, and then there's one more with John Sherman Cooper. But we disagreed on the single bullet theory.
Disagreed on one chief item. That was a question whether the shot that went through John Connally had also gone through President Kennedy. President Kennedy, there were two shots. One hit him someplace in the lower neck. The other one blew the top of his head off. And John Connally was just in front of him. We had some witnesses, chiefly Army men, who said that people, their experience going out of the Korean War, had shown that person could be shot and wouldn't know it a second. And that was their theory, that this shot that had hit the first shot had gone through President Kennedy, then through Governor Connally's chest and down his arm. Connally was certain it hadn't. He said, I know guns. I rifle. I fire them all the time. When I heard the shot, I looked immediately over my right shoulder, which was the place where Oswald was working. And then I turned around and I was hit. His testimony was very convincing, and of course we know from everything we know about him, he's a very forceful man. And he convinced Dick Russell, and I must say he convinced me that the other was too intangible, it made it more difficult to say that Oswald was the sole assassin, because the shots would have had to been that close together, and it would have to be a very good marksman. But anyway, we said that we held to the Connally theory. Most of the others were for the one two-shot theory. But we finally wrote into our summary that there had been two views, and gave the explanation.
So they wrote into the final summary that there was two views on the shot.
Here's an interesting little factoid, Robbie, is that if there was anybody on the Warren Commission that would have been a friend of John Kennedy, it would have been John Sherman Cooper. He and his wife used to dine with President Kennedy. Huh?
There's photos of it.
Yeah, they used to dine together in the White House. But here's a strange little factoid. John Sherman Cooper, see if I can get this right. John Sherman Cooper's wife used to be married to a man who was married to JFK's first wife. JFK was married to a woman by the name of Drury Malcolm. And Daddy came in and had that thing annulled, I think, like within 24 or 48 hours. And so it was a very short-lived marriage and romance, and boom, it was done. And then, of course, later on, years later, he married Jackie. But that is kind of a strange little coincidence, if there ever was one.
It's weird. It's kind of like, what is it, George DeMorenfield used to babysit Jackie Kennedy?
Exactly, yeah.
It's freaking
because he dated Jackie's mother. Yeah. That is, you're right. There are some strange connections in this case.
This is Jeremiah O'Leary talking about the discrepancies on the medical evidence.
Good one.
Hey, what are some of the things that you'd like to hear from Dr. Humes and the other testimony this afternoon?
Well, I would like to know pretty much the same thing that David has in mind. How there can be amongst trained medical men such discrepancies in terms of the trajectory of bullets and points of entry, points of exit.
The wound was where it was. It seems that a wound is an objective fact to establish. How can they come up with 4 inches difference?
Well, it's like the 5 Indians and the blind Indians and the elephant. The one that grabbed the elephant by the tail said it's very like a rope. And it depends on what their voices say.
Jerry, excuse me, Chairman Stokes is now taking his seat. It looks as if...
And then we'll go to David Lifton talking about the medical evidence.
Will be testifying. And
Dr. Humes is the man who performed the original autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital on the night of the day when President Kennedy was shot.
That's correct. And I'd be interested in hearing his explanation as to how he located the wound 4 inches off from where the panel's location is based on their examination of the photographs and x-rays. I'd also be interested even more than the wound information and the procedural irregularities. I want to hear him question publicly about why he burned any papers in connection with the autopsy and see what his answer is.
What papers did he burn?
He testified that he
testified to the
Warren Commission. That he had, there was an earlier draft of the report which he revised, which he burned in his recreation room fireplace on Sunday, November 24th. He also filed.
Sounds like the kind of thing that wasn't done in the United States until the 1970s.
Also filed a certificate that he burns, quote, certain preliminary draft notes, which may or may not be the same as this earlier draft. That has to be thoroughly probed.
I just put the documents in there so you could back up what Lifton's saying.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they're right. The Humes thing is odd. I mean, what should, Cyril Weck used to always love to say, as citizens, we should be outraged that the people chosen to do the autopsy on President Kennedy had never done a gunshot wound autopsy in their entire lives. So this is their debut, a very difficult autopsy to perform if you're a seasoned forensic pathologist. And so they basically get these guys to come in. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, none. You're just asking for people to object and re-conspiracy. If that's what you're trying to avoid, that was a major blunder.
I'm going to play some quick fire off ones. These are just about Oswald's weapons and one of them about the Tippit shooting. But this is the first time you saw Lee had a pistol. It's Robert Edgar talking to Marina Oswald.
Right.
If you look at the photographs and as is displayed on the exhibit, he's holding a rifle and he's got a handgun in a holster attached to his belt. Had you seen the handgun before? Before you took the photograph?
I don't think so. So anyway, I do not recall.
Well, do you recall if this was the first time when you were taking the photograph that you had seen him, or that you had known that he owned both a rifle and a handgun?
It's possible.
Did Lee appear to be nervous at all when you took the photograph?
No, he was just angry with me because I refused to, I was making fun of him.
This next one is the gun that killed Tippit. Monty C. Lutz is the person responding, and Robert Edgar is the one asking questions.
Regarding CE-143, Oswald's revolver, do your test-fired bullets match microscopically with CE-602, 603, 604, and 605?
Are these the bullets that were recovered from Officer Tippit, sir?
These are the bullets that were recovered from the body of Officer Tippit.
Our microscopic examination and comparison of these bullets failed to positively identify this revolver as the one that fired those bullets. We did find the class characteristics that were present, the number of lands and grooves, the width of those lands and grooves to be the same. However, the individual characteristics were not present in sufficient quantities that we could say that that revolver and no other revolver fired them.
That's
pretty interesting.
This next one is the FBI fired Oswald's test shots, or recreated Oswald's test shots, by Robert Edgar.
Did the FBI do an adequate job in their ballistics tests after the death of President Kennedy and for the Warren Commission?
I would say that considering the pressures at the time, the FBI did a very good job.
Are there any tests that you would have done at the time that were not done?
No, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
That guy, hold on a second.
Edgar?
No, Champagne.
No. Oh, yeah. Donald Champagne.
There we go. That's who I was trying to think of, and I couldn't figure out what his freaking name was.
Yep.
Mr. Champagne, I think it was during your testimony that there was some reference made to extractor markings on CE 543, one of the 3 cartridges found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Since Lee Harvey Oswald did not have any live rounds on him at the time of his apprehension, nor did officials find any at either of his residences, did you find any moldable extractor markings which would indicate the cartridge macings had been loaded in or extracted from CE 139 on more than one occasion?
No, sir, we did not.
What about CE 141, the live cartridge found in the chamber of CE 139?
No, sir.
Would such markings deteriorate over a period of time?
That is the possibility, but it's unlikely because of the nature of the cartridge case, unless you had some extreme handling of the cartridges.
Oh, looks like it's not so convinced that it was so Oswald with all the ballistics.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, I closed the chapter on these fellows in my book by saying, I'm just going to read real quick the final paragraph. It says, Mr. Champagne states that because the weapon had been fired over 100 times since it was located in the depository building, referring to the rifle, that it would significantly alter the markings and the identifications. In other words, it means the ballistic match was no longer possible because of 100 rounds being fired. That's interesting.
Did you mean this?
Panel could not match their own test-fired bullets with either the FBI's tests from '63 or the so-called pristine bullet that's been so much talked about. One of the reasons theorized that a match could not be made was that the rifle had been fired too often, somehow destroying or altering the land and groove markings. Does anyone know how many times the weapon was fired by the FBI?
Are you referring just to the FBI firing it or the number of times it was actually fired?
To rephrase the question, I'm informed by counsel that the weapon has been fired over 100 times. Is that sufficient wear that it would significantly alter the markings and the identification?
Yes, I think that with this type of weapon and the type of bullets involved, it is. I think that probably the weapon has been fired more than 100 times.
Well,
Yeah.
wonderful.
In other words, there's no way we can make an identification. Okay.
Fantastic. Let's see. This is CE 399 was similar in weight.
The Warren Commission cited firearms expert Robert Frazier as weighing the three 6.5 millimeter caliber bullets and found them to weigh 160.85, 161.5, and 161.1 grams. Is it possible that CE 399, so-called pristine bullet, weighing 158.6 grains, did not have any weight loss?
All bullets' weights are approximate due to manufacturing tolerances. There are variations, plus or minus factor. It is not possible for us to determine what the weight loss was without knowing the actual weight of the bullet prior to the time that it was fired.
Interesting.
One more smoke on the grassy knoll.
Many people in Dealey Plaza said they saw puffs of smoke coming from the direction of the grassy knoll. Do rifles or handguns emit smoke that is discernible to the human eye?
Yes, sir, they do.
Okay. Does that particular rifle emit any smoke when it's fired?
It was possible to observe some smoke emitting from the muzzle of the weapon.
I had another person fire it while I was observing in bright sunlight. I found not a puff of smoke, but the gray smoke in an outdoor condition being expelled from the front of the muzzle during the same type of ammunition, and then I used some Italian surplus ammunition and some Swedish commercial ammunition, each of them giving a considerable amount of smoke that could be readily detected as a result of being fired from a similar rifle.
The assumption also in that little exchange is that it was a Mannlicher Carcano that was used behind the or on the grassy knoll behind the stockade fence. I would argue it was probably not a Mannlicher Carcano that they used.
I want to play Gerald Ford in the Tippit shooting.
President, you mentioned the importance of Officer Tippit. Where was Lee Harvey Oswald going at the time of the shooting of Officer Tippit?
I have no immediate recollection of where he was going at that time.
Did you have an opportunity as part of the commission to retrace Lee Harvey Oswald's steps from his rooming house to the shooting of Mr. Tippit?
Yes, I went to Dallas with the Chief Justice, and we spent a full day going over precisely Oswald's movements as we understood them during that whole period. And
in that journey, did you also travel to Jack Ruby's apartment?
I don't recall that.
Yeah, I don't recall that Ford or the Chief Justice walked off the distance from Oswald's rooming house to the Tippit thing. That doesn't even sound right. I don't believe they did that. No way.
I think Gerald Ford, somebody checked out Ruby's apartment. Sawyer brought it up too. He's like, did you ever think that Ruby's apartment was just a couple blocks down from where Officer Tippit was killed? And then like J. Rankin's like, I don't think the commission ever came up with a conclusion on that. And it's just like, okay. Well, through all this, I mean, I'm sorry for making anybody sit through all these clips. I just wanted to share these clips are available on my channel. You can find them. You can Google a lot of the stuff. There's probably some new stuff in there from phone calls and stuff like that that might be interesting to you. Takes a little bit of time to put them up there, but I wanted to play some of these stuff throughout this episode. We've been talking for almost 2.5 hours here, Tim. We're going to find a wrapping point on this one, but I wanted to get your final take out of everything we've kind of discussed and kind of shown a little bit. I mean, obviously, when you're examining the lone nut argument of the Warren Commission got it right. The Warren Commission was not the investigation. The Dallas police, the FBI, and the people that actually did the interviews and groundwork were the ones that the Warren Commission was relying off of to shove.
You're absolutely right.
So when you examine the Warren Commission and what the HSCA was able to prove wrong or prove not factually correct into what was going on, the HSCA did probably one of the best jobs at exposing a lot of holes in the Warren Commission. It did have its fault on its own, but there's a lot of things on there with evidence against Oswald and stuff like that that just doesn't hold up.
No. I mean, I think what you have the Warren Commission, and then the HSCA did better. And then we had the ARRB who released documents, and we learned even more. And I think that's kind of the history of the case. As time goes on, we've learned more because of different committees, different document releases or whatever. And, sometimes people ask me about the document release, and, I try to answer it as best I can. But I'm convinced that if they don't ever release another document, I don't need them, to be honest with you. To me, the evidence is overwhelming that there was a conspiracy to kill John Kennedy, whether they ever release any more documents at all. Sure, I hope they release everything, and it sounds like they're going to. But I don't have much interest in anything more being released. Like, I'm just waiting for that smoking gun. I don't need it. To me, the evidence is already overwhelming. But whatever you want to throw into the kitty to help it, that's fine. I'll take it. But not sure we really need anything.
Well, Tim, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show today and all the other conversations we've had in the past. I recommend anybody listening to go look at Tim's past episodes where we've focused a lot less on clips and more about speaking about some of the things that we were talking about today. Tim, is there a place where people can find your book and then any other links you'd like to promote as well, too?
The book, I know you can find it on both Amazon, and you'll see copies of it on eBay as well. And thanks for having me, Robbie. I always like having these discussions with you. And again, I'm a big fan of the clips, so I love them.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blanket. Stay tuned for our next episode.